They told us the royals are flawless statues, unbreakable facades. But behind every gleaming surface lies a network of lies, omissions, and bodies hidden in plain sight. This is the story of one such body, one sister erased, not by death, but by silence. She wasn't killed, she was buried. And now, you will know everything. Watch until the end to understand why, Prince. Harry reveals the truth about the sister who was always a secret. Camilla Parker Bowles had a life before she became Queen Consort. She had children. One of them became visible, vocal, and tolerated. The other vanished. Her name is Laura Rose Parker Bowles. Today, she is known as Laura Lopes. Born in 1978 to Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles. Laura's life unfolded differently from her brother Tom's. Tom entered public life with confidence. Laura entered with caution. They made her walk a public path while keeping her invisible. She married Harry Lopes in 2006. Her wedding was attended by Charles, William, and Harry. And yet the world barely noticed. While Tom thrived in the media as a food critic and public figure, Laura slipped through gallery openings and curated guest lists, not palace corridors. The contrast was striking. Tom was acknowledged. Laura became optional, a footnote, often omitted from press kits and royal mentions. Why? Because Laura's very existence threatened the narrative the palace had worked for decades to construct. Her presence complicated the myth of a pure, unblemished Camilla, and a love story rooted in destiny. They needed her to disappear. The machinery of image control was already in motion before Laura understood the meaning of a camera flash. To grasp the depth of this erasure, you have to understand the scandal that changed everything. In 1993, the infamous Camilla Get Tepa leaked phone call between the monarchy rushed to contain the damage, but the trust was already broken. The palace scrambled to rebuild the narrative, to reshape reputations, and to cut away the threads of past lives. In a world where everything was becoming public, survival depended on deletion. Laura was one of those threads. Not cut with chaos, but removed with precision. She would only exist when it was safe for her to do so. Her life could never challenge the carefully curated mythos. At royal events, she appeared like a ghost present, but never acknowledged. Her name was quietly removed from press releases. Her existence, though undeniable, was treated like a problem best ignored. She became a living contradiction, a daughter of the Queen Consort. Bound by blood to the throne, yet treated like an outsider. Her mother's past, her early life, and her children were part of a history that had no place in the version of royalty the palace wanted the world to see. The palace glosses over the inconvenient parts. For Laura to be allowed any real visibility would mean allowing scrutiny, and scrutiny could unravel everything. As she grew older, she didn't always stay silent. Sources say William and Laura clashed in ways that weren't just childish arguments, but full-blown confrontations. William blamed Camilla for the way his mother was erased from history. Laura is reported to have screamed at him, "Your father has ruined my life." These weren't harmless outbursts. These were bombs, but they never made headlines. That silence wasn't accidental. The palace's apparatus was already working. Press secretaries, courtiers, and private staff were all given one clear instruction: minimize Laura, not out of courtesy, but to contain the threat she posed to the carefully built royal image. Her face might appear in a photo, but her name wouldn't. Her attendance at events would be implied but not confirmed. She became a placeholder, a glitch, a ghost. This is the threshold between protection and punishment. The story they fed the public was, we kept her private out of kindness. But kindness doesn't require someone to be erased. The power structure of the monarchy doesn't just protect its sacrifices. And few are sacrificed as quietly as the women tied to royal bloodlines. There's something else you need to know. Something that's been kept hidden. Behind closed palace doors, Laura was once discussed as potential heir material. It's not publicly, not in official statements, but in institutional planning. Drafts of correspondence reportedly exist where her future role was considered, then denied, then erased. These drafts were quietly removed, deleted, denied. The erasure was retroactive. That's the secret they'll never admit. Every ghost has a jailer. Laura's disappearance from public life wasn't an accident, it was engineered. The question is, by whom and why? Why just her hand, not her brother? When Camilla became involved with Charles in the 1970s, the palace branded her unsuitable. Too ordinary, too experienced, too marked by history. She was pushed out of Charles's circle, and Diana was brought in to take her place. But when Diana died in 1997, everything changed. The monarchy entered a full-blown crisis. Charles, desperate to legitimize his decades-long affair, insisted that Camilla be brought into the royal fold. The courtiers agreed, but under strict conditions. The first condition was that her children would never rival the official bloodline. Tom and Laura Parker Bowles were considered remnants of a marriage the palace wanted forgotten. They were not to receive royal titles. They were not to be offered royal roles. They would never be positioned as heirs, allies, or even visible family members. The second condition was that any visibility they were given would be strictly rationed. Laura could attend weddings, christenings, and staged family photos, but she would be left out of speeches, formal acknowledgments, and press releases. Her presence was treated as incidental. It's barely worth noting. The third condition was the most personal. William and Harry would be shielded from her existence. The palace feared what her presence might reignite. Grief over Diana, anger over Camilla, memories of betrayal. They were right to worry. Reports say William and Laura couldn't stand each other as teenagers. He reportedly told friends at Eton, "She's not my family." Laura, in turn, was furious at being cast as the daughter of the other woman. Their confrontations were deliberately buried long before they could reach the public. But this silencing wasn't just passive. It had an architect. Behind Charles stood Mark Bolland, his private secretary, and the man credited with rehabilitating Camilla's public image. Bolland was a master of spin. He helped craft the version of Camilla the public would accept, a loyal partner, not a homewrecker. To sell that myth, the past had to be pruned. That meant downplaying anyone and anything that contradicted the story. Andrew Parker Bowles was downplayed. Camilla's children were downplayed. Anything that threatened the fantasy had to be quietly pushed aside. Laura's identity became collateral damage. You can see the tactic if you look closely. When Camilla finally married Charles in 2005, her son Tom gave a public interview. He was polished, witty, media-ready. Laura didn't. She wasn't offered the platform. The palace never put her forward, never prepped her for interviews, never framed her as a modern, relatable royal figure. She was held back, kept in the shadows by design. But shadows don't erase pain. People close to both families have recalled the constant undercurrent of conflict. Even at Prince William's wedding in 2011, where Laura was visibly present beside Camilla and Tom, the press failed to identify her correctly. Photographers captured her, but editors cropped her out. Her body was literally erased from the visual record. That's not accident, that's control. Still, Laura carved out a life for herself, one that never truly aligned with the royal world. She pursued a career in the arts, became a respected gallery curator, co-founded 11 Gallery in London. Her work gained admiration. Yet even there, her identity was filtered. She wasn't introduced as Laura Lopes, the curator, but as Camilla's daughter. When she married Harry Lopes, the press didn't celebrate her career or individuality. Instead, she was labeled the stepdaughter of Prince Charles. Not a woman in her own right, just an appendage to someone else's narrative. And here's where the cruelty deepens. Laura wasn't erased because she did something wrong. She was erased because she existed at all. She reminded the world that Charles and Camilla had a life long before their romance was legitimized. The monarchy is built on reinvention, but reinvention demands forgetfulness. Laura was living proof of a story the Windsors desperately wanted the world to forget. But the erasure was strategic. Not absolute. She wasn't banned from the family. She was at Sandringham for Christmases. She attended jubilees, funerals. Her presence wasn't denied, just never acknowledged. She was always there, yet never named. A ghost, not a guest. It's the same tactic used again and again with inconvenient women. Think of Princess Margaret's lover Peter Townsend, cast into exile. Think of Diana's tapes, edited and sanitized until the truth lost its edge. The monarchy doesn't need to kill. It only needs to erase just enough for the record to bend. The cost to Laura was enormous. Imagine watching your mother marry into the most powerful family in Britain and being told you don't belong to that power. Imagine standing in official portraits but being cropped out of them later. Imagine knowing your stepbrothers, William and Harry, would one day rule a nation, while you were treated like a smudge on a glass pane. The palace calls this protection. But protection for whom? Not for Laura. It was protection for Camilla. Protection for Charles. Protection for the institution itself. Every omission, every carefully worded press release, every edited photo was about preserving the royal myth. But there's a deeper layer here, darker than silence, because Laura wasn't only minimized, she was used. During the years when Camilla's reputation hung by a thread, Laura became a pawn. Her silence was useful. Her absence was part of the bargain. By fading into the background, she cleared the path for her mother to rise. She became a ghost not just to protect the crown, but to serve it. At this point, you may realize the truth. What happened to her wasn't just erasure, it was psychological torture. Imagine waking up every day and having to erase yourself. Not just publicly, but internally. That's not just cruelty. That's exploitation. Laura Parker Bowles wasn't forgotten. She was sacrificed when the Camilla Gate tape exploded in 1993. The monarchy experienced a scandal so grotesque, it nearly shattered Charles's future as king. The public heard the private, crude fantasies of a future monarch, most notoriously Charles expressing his wish to be reincarnated as Camilla's tampon. It was obscene, deeply human, and utterly at odds with everything royalty is meant to represent. Camilla's children were old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to hear the whispers and know what they meant. And in that moment, Laura, still a teenager, became a liability. The media went hunting for her. They wanted photos, reactions, anything. And the palace knew what had to be done. Camilla's daughter became a risk simply by existing. So the palace tightened control. After Charles and Diana's divorce in 1996, the strategy hardened. Charles was determined to elevate Camilla. Under the guidance of his spin, Dr. Mark Bolland, a plan was crafted to normalize her image. That plan didn't just involve Camilla Hid, included silencing Laura. Her absence became part of the cost for Camilla's ascent. It happened gradually. Camilla's reintroduction to public life came in carefully staged steps. Private events first, then low-key charity galas. Every appearance was calculated. But Laura was never part of those scripts. When Camilla was attacked in the press as a marriage wrecker, Laura didn't speak. When Diana's infamous Panorama interview reopened the wounds of the affair, Laura didn't defend her mother. She was invisible, because invisibility was demanded. One candid word, one flicker of pain or defiance, could have revived Diana's ghost and torpedoed Camilla's future. So Laura's silence wasn't just expected. It was enforced. Family friends recall how tightly she was managed. Invitations were filtered, press blocked. Appearances arranged to control the optics. The message was clear: stay hidden, or you risk everything. Not just your own peace, but your mother's place in history. That's more than pressure, that's emotional blackmail. And when the monarchy needed her, they used her. At Prince William's 2011 wedding, Laura's presence was choreographed to send a message of unity. She stood alongside family, but the press was instructed not to highlight her identity. She was there, but only as a backdrop. Never the subject. Not a person, just a prop. That is what exploitation looks like. Being made to exist only when it's useful, and erase the moment you become inconvenient. Her brother Tom Parker Bowles had a different experience. He was given a public voice, TV appearances, cookbook deals. He was charming, cheeky, and spun as a lovable rogue. The monarchy could use that. But Laura was the opposite: quiet, reflective, composed. That made her dangerous. A quiet woman who sees too much can undo a narrative simply by being honest. And honesty was a threat the Windsors couldn't afford. Then, there were the fights with William. Their animosity wasn't some private teenage spat, it was a collision of grief and rage. William, haunted by his mother's erasure, lashed out. Laura, humiliated by the erasure of her own existence, fired back. The line that surfaced, "Your father has ruined my life," wasn't a tantrum. It was truth. Truth spoken in a system built on lies. But that truth couldn't be allowed to spread. So the palace buried their hostility, along with every other inconvenient reality. This is the royal machine. It doesn't solve its problems, it buries them. Diana was silenced with isolation. Meghan was silenced with bullying. Laura was silenced with omission. Different tactics, same goal: erase the woman before she can speak against the crown. But Laura's silence wasn't passive. It was weaponized. As Charles and Camilla inched toward marriage, the palace spun a narrative of family healing. They painted Camilla's children as private, loyal, supportive. In truth, they were gagged. Laura's lack of public statements was reframed as discretion. Her forced absence was repackaged as grace. The palace didn't just silence her, they used her silence to serve their story. Meanwhile, Laura tried to live a life outside of it all. She focused on her art, her marriage, her children. She tried to build normalcy. But in her world, normal was another kind of prison. Every time her gallery opened a show, the press identified her not by her work, but by her bloodline, Camilla's daughter. Not Laura, the curator. Just Laura, the royal shadow. Every professional step chained to a system that refused to claim her, yet never let her go, and the public never saw her pain. That was by design. If people had really seen it, they might have asked hard questions. What was the true cost of Camilla's throne? Who paid the price so the monarchy could save face? The answer was always Laura, but secrets don't stay buried forever. Silence, too, begins to rot. Because Laura was never fully erased. She was never entirely quiet. In whispers, in rare circles, stories have begun to surface of what she kept. Letters, journals, memories from the years when her mother was despised, not yet redeemed. When Charles was mocked, when the palace scrambled to contain the fallout, when Camilla Gate painted the monarchy in its most grotesque light, Laura was already the ghost, and she may have carried the one thing the crown could never bury: proof. Proof that the monarchy's so-called rebirth wasn't built on forgiveness, but on coercion. That behind every carefully staged photo op and every softened headline was a calculated trade. Her silence, her erasure, her life. For decades, Laura was cast as the quiet one, the polite stepdaughter who kept her head down, the daughter who chose a private life. But silence that's seamless is never natural. It is sculpted, managed, and when silence is sculpted, there's always something underneath worth hiding. The rumors began small. Whispers in aristocratic circles that Laura kept old letters written by Camilla during the darkest years, when Charles was still married to Diana, and Camilla set the press on fire. These weren't love notes. They were survival documents. Correspondence with courtiers, records of conversations, of damage control, of the family's internal collapse. Notes not just about love, but about power. It's about what had to be sacrificed to keep Camilla's future viable. If such letters exist, they'd change everything. They would reveal that Laura was not simply a private citizen who chose to stay out of sight. She was made invisible. That her silence wasn't noble, it was negotiated. A bargain struck to sanitize Camilla, to smooth the path to the throne. In that narrative, Laura wasn't protected. She was offered up. Collateral in a transaction between a crumbling royal image and an institution desperate to survive. And then there's Hera the son, who broke ranks. The one who walked away. When he said publicly that the institution was willing to sacrifice others to protect the crown, the world assumed he was talking about Meghan. But the pattern is older. The tactic recycled. Look closer, and the outline of Laura is there, faint, but familiar. He knew her. He watched her ghosted from the same halls he grew up in. He saw what happened to her before it happened to Meghan. And in that, you understand something chilling? Laura was the prototype. But here's the darkest part. Laura never rebelled. She never leaked a diary, never wrote a tell, never even let herself become a symbol. Her silence held. Whether out of loyalty, fear, or quiet resignation, she remained the ghost the palace required. And that silence, perfect, polished, unbroken, is not peaceful. It's pressure. It's the residue of control, of a deal signed in unspoken terms. This is how the monarchy functions, not just by shaping public perception, but by managing private lives. It thrives on erasure, removing people from the record so efficiently that the public forgets to ask where they went. Laura's story reveals the institution's most brutal truth. It does not forget. It selects. It curates. It edits. It decides who gets remembered on, who gets deleted. Laura wasn't erased because she lacked importance. She was erased because her truth had the power to unravel everything. Her letters, if they exist, could expose the scaffolding behind Camilla's redemption, behind Charles's ascent, behind the myth of a monarchy that learns and evolves. What those letters might contain isn't just scandal. It's evidence that the very thing the public was told to believe in, reform, healing, love, was built on sacrifice. And the cruelty of it is that Laura never asked for a throne, never asked to be royalty. All she wanted was a life. Instead, she became the cost, the price her mother paid to stand beside the future king. Her name was clipped from press releases, her image cropped from photos, her voice muffled in favor of the crown's storyline. She wasn't forgotten. She was redacted. But ghosts don't die. They linger. They haunt. And the more the palace tries to pretend she was never there, the louder her absence becomes. What if those letters are real? What if they're sitting in a drawer somewhere, in a safe, waiting not to ruin, but to reveal? What if her children, or her estate, one day unsealed the vault? That's the fear. Not a tell-all, not a scandal, but a quiet record that confirms what so many suspect. The monarchy didn't reform. It revised. It rewrote. And to do that, it needed someone to disappear. Laura was that someone. In the end, the scandal isn't just that Laura Parker Bowles was erased. The scandal is why. To protect Camilla, to rehabilitate Charles, to preserve an institution already rotting beneath the gold. Laura never broke her silence. But maybe she didn't need to. Because sometimes, the loudest scream is the one the crown is most afraid to hear. And maybe it's already echoing.